The knife hit my plate with enough force that everyone at the table froze. My father's face was red, his voice booming across the private dining room at Bellacourt Restaurant in downtown Portland. "You are a worthless disappointment, Elena. An absolute waste of the education we gave you." My mother nodded in agreement, dabbing her mouth with a cloth napkin like we were discussing the weather. 28 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A tiny apartment, no husband, no real career. Just embarrassment after embarrassment. My younger brother, Trevor, smirked from across the table, his fiancée Melissa clutching his arm with manufactured sympathy. This was my nephew's birthday dinner. Little Aiden had just turned 5. And my parents had chosen this moment, surrounded by extended family, to publicly humiliate me. Again. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I smiled. Because what they didn't know, what none of them sitting at that table knew, was that the worthless disappointment they were berating owned the building they were sitting in. I'd bought Bellacourt Restaurant 6 months ago as an investment property. The wine they were drinking? From my private collection in the cellar. The reservation they bragged about getting on such short notice? My assistant made it happen with one phone call. I wasn't worthless. I was just quiet about my success. And that silence was about to become the most expensive mistake they'd ever made me keep. My name is Elena Voss, and if you're watching this, stay with me. Because the daughter they spent 3 decades diminishing was about to show them exactly what worthless really looks like. I wasn't always invisible to them. When I was younger, maybe 7 or 8, my father used to call me his little genius. I'd bring home straight A's, win spelling bees, solve math problems faster than kids twice my age. He'd ruffle my hair and tell people at parties, "That's my Elena. Smartest kid in her class." But somewhere around middle school, something shifted. I became awkward, bookish, more interested in computers than cheerleading. My body didn't develop curves like the other girls. I preferred robotics club to dances. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, my father's pride turned to disappointment. "Why can't you be more like the other girls?" became his favorite refrain. "Why do you have to be so difficult?" My mother was worse. She'd wanted a daughter she could dress up, take shopping, bond with over makeup tutorials and boy talk. Instead, she got me, a kid who wore the same hoodie for a week straight and spent weekends building computers from salvaged parts. "I don't understand you," she'd say with this particular tone of disgust, like I was a foreign object that had somehow appeared in her perfect family. Then Trevor was born when I was 7, and everything changed completely. He was everything I wasn't: outgoing, athletic, charming. He smiled and people loved him. He struggled in school and they called it finding his path. He got arrested twice for drunk driving in college and they called it youthful mistakes. Meanwhile, I graduated high school 2 years early and they asked why I couldn't be more normal. The pattern was set. Trevor was the golden child. I was the problem child who happened to have good grades. And good grades, I learned quickly, meant nothing if you didn't perform your role the way they expected. If you didn't smile enough, dress right, date the right people, make them look good to their friends. I learned to be useful instead of loved. I fixed their computers, managed their finances when they asked, helped Trevor with his homework throughout high school and college. I became the background support system, the one they called when they needed something but never thought to include when they celebrated. My college graduation? They didn't come. They were at Trevor's baseball tournament. My first job at a tech startup in Seattle? That's nice, honey. Can you look at your father's laptop while you're here? My promotion to senior developer at 23? When are you going to find a real career? Something stable, like teaching? Nothing I did was ever enough. Because I wasn't performing the role they'd written for me. I wasn't getting married, giving them grandchildren, living the conventional life they could brag about to their friends at the country club. I was making good money, building a career in tech, investing aggressively, but none of that mattered because it didn't fit their narrative. So I stopped trying to fit. I stopped showing up to every family dinner. Stopped explaining my career to people who'd already decided it wasn't impressive. stopped sharing my wins with people who'd find a way to diminish them. I pulled back, built my life quietly, and let them believe whatever they wanted to believe about me. They thought I was struggling. They thought my small apartment was all I could afford, not understanding that I'd bought the entire building as an investment and lived in the smallest unit by choice. They thought I was single because no one wanted me, not knowing I'd turned down 3 marriage proposals because I refused to settle. They thought my little tech job was barely paying my bills, completely unaware that I'd been promoted to Chief Technology Officer last year with a salary that dwarfed my father's retirement income. I let them think it. Because their underestimation was my advantage. While they pitied me, I was building an empire they couldn't see. While they mocked my choices, I was making investments that would secure my future for generations. While they called me worthless, I was quietly becoming worth more than all of them combined. And I documented everything. Every dismissive comment, every time they chose Trevor over me, every moment they made me feel small. I kept records like a historian, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because I knew, deep down, that one day I'd need proof that I wasn't crazy. That the neglect was real. That their treatment of me wasn't some misunderstood expression of love but a deliberate pattern of devaluation. That night at Bellacourt Restaurant, when my father called me worthless in front of the entire family, something inside me finally snapped. Not in an emotional way. In a cold, calculated way. The girl who'd spent 28 years trying to earn their approval died in that moment. And in her place stood a woman who understood exactly what needed to happen next. After my father's outburst, the table fell silent. My Aunt Rachel looked uncomfortable. My Uncle Tom studied his wine glass. Even Melissa, who barely knew me, seemed embarrassed by the display. But no one said anything. No one defended me. They just sat there, letting his words hang in the air like they were acceptable, like this was just normal family dynamics. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and looked directly at my father. "You're right," I said quietly. "I am worthless. At least, that's what you've been telling me for 20 years. I finally believe you." My mother's eyes widened slightly. "Elena, don't be dramatic. Your father didn't mean." "He meant exactly what he said," I interrupted, my voice still calm. "And I'm grateful. Because you've just given me something I've needed for a very long time, permission to stop caring what you think." I turned to leave, but my father grabbed my wrist. "Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at his hand on my wrist, then at his face. "Let go." Something in my tone made him release me immediately. I picked up my purse, smiled at little Aiden who looked confused by the tension, and walked out of the restaurant. My restaurant. The one they didn't know I owned. The one I'd been quietly renovating, planning to turn into a flagship property for my growing real estate portfolio. I drove home in silence, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind already 3 steps ahead. Because this wasn't just about hurt feelings or family drama. This was about a lifetime of diminishment, of being treated as less than, of watching my brother get praise for mediocrity while I got criticism for excellence. This was about parents who'd systematically devalued me while simultaneously using me as their personal IT support, financial advisor, and emotional dumping ground. They'd called me worthless. Fine. Now they were about to find out what life looked like without the daughter they'd taken for granted for 3 decades. And I wasn't going to burn bridges loudly. I was going to remove them quietly, one plank at a time, until they were standing on nothing and wondering how they'd gotten there. When I got home, I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I'd been maintaining for 5 years. It was labeled simply, Independence Plan. Inside were spreadsheets, legal documents, financial records, and a detailed timeline of every way I was still connected to my family. Every obligation, every favor, every thread that tied me to them. Bank account where I was listed as emergency contact for my parents. Documented. The loan I'd co-signed for Trevor's car 3 years ago. Documented. The investment property my father had put in my name for tax purposes that I'd been managing for free. Documented. The family cell phone plan I'd been paying the bulk of because I had the tech job and could afford it. Documented. The life insurance policy where I was listed as beneficiary but also as the one making the premium payments for my parents. Documented. Everything. Every single way they'd woven me into their lives while simultaneously devaluing my presence. Every financial thread, every legal connection, every obligation I'd accepted because I thought that's what family did. It was all there, organized, annotated, with legal documentation and screenshots of conversations. I'd been preparing for this moment without fully realizing it. Every time they'd dismissed me, every time they'd called me difficult or ungrateful or worthless, some part of me had been building an exit strategy. Not out of malice, but out of survival. Because deep down, I'd always known this relationship was conditional. That their love, if you could call it that, came with strings. And the moment I stopped being useful, those strings would be cut. So I'd documented the strings. And now I was going to cut them myself. All of them. Systematically. Permanently. I started with the simple things. The family cell phone plan was under my name, with my parents and Trevor as additional lines. I'd been paying the full bill for 2 years after my father, temporarily, lost his business and just needed help for a few months. Those months had turned into 24 of them, with no mention of repayment, no acknowledgement of the favor, just expectation that I'd keep covering it. I logged into the account and separated their lines. Created individual accounts for each of them. Set the activation date for 3 days from now. They'd get a notification that they needed to set up their own payment information. No explanation, no warning. Just a businesslike email from the cell phone company informing them of the change. Next was the investment property. 7 years ago, my father had bought a duplex in the Pearl District as a rental property. But he'd put it in my name because I was in a lower tax bracket and it made financial sense. I'd been managing it ever since. Finding tenants, handling repairs, dealing with midnight emergencies. The rental income went straight to my parents. I got nothing except the experience and the liability on my credit report. I drafted an email to my attorney, Marcus Hendricks, who I'd been working with for 3 years on various real estate deals. Marcus, I need to transfer property ownership back to my father. The Pearl District duplex. I want it out of my name by end of month. Draw up whatever paperwork is needed. I'll sign immediately. Then I looked at the co-signed car loan. Trevor's BMW that he'd begged me to co-sign for because his credit wasn't great but he really needed a reliable car for his new job. That job had lasted 6 months. The car payments? Still coming out of my account on autopay because he'd forgotten to update the payment method 8 months ago and I'd just been covering them to protect my credit score. I called the loan company. Hi, yes, I'm a co-signer on account number 4478 to 2193. I need to know my options for removing myself from this loan. The representative explained I could request removal if the primary borrower could refinance or if they had sufficient payment history and credit. Trevor's credit was garbage. He couldn't refinance. Which meant he'd either need to start paying it himself or lose the car. I submitted the formal request. Let the chips fall where they may. One by one, I worked through the list. The home insurance policy where I was listed as the contact and had been paying the premiums. I called and removed myself, transferred all responsibility back to my parents. The streaming services I'd been sharing passwords for. Changed the passwords. The Amazon Prime account they used constantly. Removed their profiles. The cloud storage where I'd been backing up all of my mother's photos for years. Downloaded everything to a hard drive, shipped it to them, canceled the subscription. Every single tiny thread of dependence. Cut. Removed. Severed. And I did it all in the span of 4 hours, sitting at my dining room table with a glass of wine and a checklist, feeling lighter with each task completed. This wasn't anger. This was liberation. Around midnight, my phone started ringing. My mother. I didn't answer. She called 3 more times. Then my father. Then Trevor. I silenced my phone and kept working. Because I knew what this was. They'd started getting the notifications. The automatic emails about account changes. The service interruptions. And they were panicking, reaching out to their personal IT support to fix whatever was going wrong. But nothing was going wrong. Everything was going exactly right. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't fixing their problems. I wasn't smoothing over their messes. I wasn't being the invisible support system that held their lives together while they called me worthless. I was done. Not in a temporary, I need space, kind of way. In a permanent, irreversible kind of way. Because you don't come back from calling your daughter worthless in a room full of people. You don't recover from a lifetime of diminishment with a simple apology. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. By 1 a.m, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. I read through them with detached curiosity, like I was studying a case file instead of messages from my family. My mother, Elena, what's going on with the cell phone? Call me immediately. My father, I'm getting weird emails about property transfers. Did you do something? Trevor, yo, my phone just stopped working. Can you call the company? My mother again, this is ridiculous. Whatever you're upset about, you're being childish. Fix the accounts. My father, Elena Marie Voss, you call me right now. This is unacceptable. Not one of them acknowledged what had happened at dinner. Not one apology. Not one, maybe we went too far. Just immediate demands that I fix the inconvenience I'd created by removing myself from their lives. It was almost funny. Almost. Because even in the midst of losing their personal IT support, their financial safety net, their problem solver, they still couldn't see me as anything but a tool that had malfunctioned. A service that had gone offline. Not a human being with feelings who'd been pushed past her breaking point. I turned my phone off completely. Poured another glass of wine. And pulled up the second folder on my laptop, future plans. This one was different. This one wasn't about removing myself from their lives. This one was about building a life so successful, so undeniable, so publicly documented that they'd have to watch from the outside as the daughter they called worthless became everything they said I'd never be. Because removing support was just phase 1. Phase 2 was about proving, once and for all, that their assessment of me was spectacularly wrong. And I wasn't going to do it quietly anymore. I was going to do it in a way that made sure everyone who'd sat silently at that dinner table, everyone who'd watched them demean me without saying a word, would see exactly who I really was. The worthless daughter was dead. The woman who replaced her was about to become unforgettable. The first thing my father did was show up at my office. 3 days after the dinner, 3 days of me ignoring every call, every text, every increasingly desperate message, he walked into the headquarters of Vertex Solutions like he had every right to be there. My company. The tech firm I'd co-founded 4 years ago that now had 127 employees and had just closed a $40 million Series B funding round. Security called my assistant before he made it past the lobby. Ms. Voss, there's a Thomas Voss here claiming to be your father. He doesn't have an appointment. Should we send him away? I said without hesitation. Add him to the permanent no-access list. Him, Patricia Voss, and Trevor Voss. None of them are authorized to enter this building under any circumstances. There was a pause. Understood, Ms. Voss. We'll handle it. Through my office window on the 12th floor, I watched 5 minutes later as my father was escorted back to his car by 2 security guards. He was gesturing wildly, clearly arguing, clearly believing that his status as my father meant something here. It didn't. In this building, I wasn't his disappointing daughter. I was the chief technology officer and co-founder. And he was trespassing. My phone buzzed with a text from him. I can't believe you had me thrown out like a criminal. What has happened to you? I deleted it without responding. What had happened to me? I'd finally stopped allowing people who hurt me to have access to me. That's what had happened. My co-founder, Priya Malhotra, knocked on my door an hour later. We'd met in graduate school at MIT, bonded over a shared vision for cloud infrastructure solutions, and built Vertex from a dorm room project into a company now valued at $180 million. She was the only person I'd told about the dinner incident. Your father, she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. Tried to show up unannounced. Security handled it. Priya studied me for a moment. You're really doing this? Cutting them off completely. I already did it. 3 days ago. I'm just enforcing boundaries now. Good, she said firmly. I've been waiting years for you to realize you don't owe them anything. They've been an anchor around your neck since I've known you. Remember when we were closing our Series A and your brother called 17 times during the pitch meeting because he needed you to help him write a cover letter? I did remember. I'd had to silence my phone while investors were literally writing us a $12 million check because Trevor couldn't figure out basic job application etiquette on his own. Speaking of boundaries, Priya continued, I have a proposal. We've been talking about doing a feature in TechCrunch about women founders in the Pacific Northwest. They want to profile you specifically. Talk about your journey, your background, your success story. I think you should do it. I don't do press, I said automatically. I'd always avoided media attention, partly because I was private by nature, partly because I didn't want my family seeing it and asking for money or favors. I know. But Elena, you've been hiding your success for years because you were afraid of how your family would react. They already know you're successful now, or they're about to. So why keep hiding? Why not let the world see what you've built? She had a point. I'd spent so long making myself small, keeping my achievements quiet, avoiding attention because I didn't want to deal with my family's judgment or jealousy. But that version of me, the one who shrank to make others comfortable, she was gone. Set up the interview, I said. Let's tell the real story. The article went live 2 weeks later. The headline read, From Underestimated to Unstoppable, How Elena Voss Built an $180 million tech company while her family called her worthless. I hadn't planned to be quite that candid. But when the journalist, a woman named Rebecca Chen, asked me about my motivation, about what drove me to succeed despite having no family support, I told her the truth. Not all of it, not the specific dinner incident, but enough. Enough about being dismissed, being called difficult, being told I'd never amount to anything because I didn't fit their conventional mold. The article exploded. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. Women from all over the country started sharing it with comments like, "This is my story too," and, "Finally someone said it out loud." I got interview requests from Forbes, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. My LinkedIn received 4,000 connection requests in a single day. And my phone, which I'd been ignoring for 2 weeks, suddenly started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Including my family. My mother's message arrived at 6:47 a.m. Elena, what have you done? Do you have any idea how humiliating this article is for us? Everyone in our social circle has seen it. You've made us look like terrible parents. You need to issue a retraction immediately. No apology. No acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, if they looked like terrible parents in the article, it was because they'd been terrible parents. Just concern about their reputation, their image, their standing in the community. I didn't respond to Trevor either. Instead, I forwarded the text to Marcus. Add this to the file. Evidence of continued harassment and victim blaming. The restraining order hearing was perfunctory. I presented the evidence, my explicit requests for no contact, their violations, the security footage from my apartment building, the attempted workplace intrusion, the documented pattern of showing up unannounced. The judge, a tired-looking man in his 50s, barely needed to deliberate. Temporary restraining order granted. No contact with petitioner, direct or indirect, for 1 year. This includes physical proximity, phone calls, texts, emails, social media, or third-party communication. Violation will result in arrest. Next case. My parents sat in the courtroom looking stunned, like they couldn't quite believe this was happening. Like their daughter had somehow transformed into a stranger. They weren't wrong. I had transformed. I'd stopped being the person who absorbed their toxicity so they could feel better about themselves. And that person, the one who'd set herself on fire to keep them warm, she was never coming back. After the hearing, Marcus and I grabbed coffee at a small cafe near the courthouse. "You did the right thing," he said. "I've handled a lot of family law cases. What you're describing, it's textbook emotional abuse and financial exploitation. The fact that you documented everything, that you built your own life despite them, that's remarkable." "It doesn't feel remarkable," I admitted. "It feels necessary. Like this is what survival looks like." "That's exactly what it is. And Elena, I want you to know something. In the 5 years I've known you, I've watched you build an incredible company, make smart investments, create a life that most people only dream about. And the whole time, you've been carrying this weight. These people who told you that you weren't enough, that you were worthless. Now that you've cut that weight loose, there's no limit to what you can do." He was right. I could feel it already. The mental energy I'd been spending on managing my family's dysfunction, on bracing myself for their criticism, on trying to prove my worth to people who would never acknowledge it, all of that energy was now available for other things. For building. For creating. For thriving. The real shift happened about 6 weeks after the restraining order. I was in a board meeting for Vertex, presenting our Q3 results, and my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at it during a break. The subject line read, "Property foreclosure notice, Pearl District duplex." My father hadn't been paying the mortgage. For 3 months, apparently. Since the property transferred to his name, he'd just stopped making payments. And now the bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. The property I'd managed flawlessly for 7 years, always on time, always maintained, was about to be seized because he couldn't be bothered to handle the responsibility he'd always claimed was his. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a note, "Not my problem anymore, but FYI in case they tried to make it my problem." Around this same time, Trevor's BMW got repossessed. I knew because he posted about it on Facebook, a long rant about predatory lending practices, and corrupt banks, and how the system is rigged against normal people. Not one word about how he'd stopped making payments 8 months ago. Not one acknowledgement that I'd been covering those payments to protect my credit while he drove around in a luxury car he couldn't afford. The comments on his post were telling. Some friends offered sympathy. But others, people who knew our history, who'd watched him coast through life on other people's money, they weren't as kind. "Bro, didn't your sister co-sign that loan? Did you even try to pay it? And, maybe get a job and pay your own bills instead of blaming the system." He deleted the post within a few hours. But I'd screenshot it. Because even now, even facing real consequences, he couldn't take responsibility. It was everyone else's fault. The banks. The system. Me, presumably, for removing myself as his safety net. 3 months after that dinner, I got an email from my mother. Not a text, an email. Formal, carefully worded, clearly written and rewritten multiple times. "Dear Elena, I'm writing to you because your father and I don't know what else to do. Our lives have fallen apart since you cut us off. The duplex is in foreclosure. Our cell phone bills have doubled now that we're paying for our own plan. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof from the stress. Trevor lost his car and his job and is back living with us. Our friends have read that article and we can barely show our faces at the club anymore. I know you're angry. I know we hurt you. But please, Elena, this has gone too far. We're your parents. We made mistakes, but we don't deserve this. Can't we find a way to fix this? Can't you forgive us and help us get back on our feet? We're drowning. We need you. Please. Mom." I read it sitting in my new home office. I'd bought a house 6 weeks earlier. A beautiful craftsman in the West Hills with a view of Mount Hood, 4 bedrooms, a home office with custom built-ins, and a garden that got morning sun. It was the kind of house I'd dreamed about since I was a kid. The kind of place that represented making it, belonging somewhere, having roots. And I'd bought it without telling anyone in my family. Because it was mine. My achievement. My milestone. And I didn't need their approval or acknowledgement or inevitable criticism to enjoy it. I sat in that office, in that house, reading my mother's email, and I felt nothing but peace. Because she still didn't get it. None of them did. They thought this was about anger, about punishment, about me being vindictive or holding a grudge. They couldn't comprehend that this was about liberation. About removing myself from a dynamic that had been poisoning me for 30 years. "We need you," she wrote. And there it was. The crux of everything. Not, "we love you," or "we value you," or "we're sorry for how we treated you." Just, "we need you." Because that's all I'd ever been to them. A resource. A utility. Someone whose worth was measured entirely by what I could provide. I replied. One sentence. "I hope you find the help you need. It won't be coming from me." Then I blocked her email address, the last form of contact I'd left open. Because I was done explaining myself. Done justifying my boundaries. Done carrying the weight of people who'd spent 3 decades trying to convince me I wasn't strong enough to carry my own dreams. They'd called me worthless at that dinner. And in doing so, they'd freed me. Because once you accept that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally never will, you stop seeking their approval. You stop shrinking yourself to fit their expectations. You stop believing their assessment of your value. And you start building a life so magnificent, so undeniably successful, that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Not because you're proving them wrong, but because you've transcended the need for their validation entirely. I was free. Finally, completely, irrevocably free. And the life I was building in that freedom was worth more than any relationship I'd lost to claim it.